Where can I buy a property in the EU and be granted residency in 2024? Question a lot of potential investors, retirees, business people, and high net worth individuals are probably asking themselves now, given that popular programs like Spain's and Portugal's have been either scrapped or modified looking at the real estate option, such that property purchases no longer grant eligibility for a golden visa in these countries. The good news is that there are still 4 countries in the EU that offer residency via property investment, and in this video, I'm going to tell you about their programs, what the property prices are like in these countries, and who these programs might be best suited to. Let's get right into it. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Spain for the past 4.5 years. I consider myself a global citizen and I have a strong interest in property. You'll see that from various videos that I've done on the channel already, where I talk about my ventures with property here in Spain. So let's get right into it with our first country, which we travel to the north of Europe to. Actually surprised me to see this country on the list, but it is nevertheless an option for those of you who are interested, and that is Latvia. And Latvia's program has been up and running for quite a while now, about 15 years or so since it was first introduced, back when Latvia had not joined the euro at that time and that the prices were denominated in Latvian lats. Today Latvia uses the euro, and the minimum investment for their property investment program is 250,000 euros. Now this can be one or multiple properties either in the Riga region, in the surrounding cities, or outside of Riga as well. Two important points to note about the legislation here. One is that the foreigner has owned the property for at least a year before moving to Latvia, and the second is that there are no charges or debts against the property. That's to say that you would have to buy the property outright and you couldn't do so with a mortgage. And looking at some prices that I was able to find through ProperStar, a UK property website, I was able to find that the average price per meter squared in Riga for an apartment is around 2,100 euros. That's for a 3-bedroom apartment, and for a house in Riga the average price per meter squared is around 1,200 euros per meter squared. Surprisingly though, there is a city that is more expensive than Riga in terms of price per meter squared, and that is the city of Jurmala. Forgive my pronunciation if I pronounced it wrong, which is actually on the coast by the sea, right near to Riga. And the typical price per meter squared for an apartment there is 3,100 euros per meter squared, and for a house 2,421 euros. Now many of you are probably thinking, sure, Latvia looks very beautiful, especially Riga, but of course given the geographical situation, it does have very cold winters, short days, very light summers granted, but perhaps something that's not compatible with someone who's looking for a warm, sunny climate all year round. That said, there is no physical presence requirement specified when applying for this residency permit, so you wouldn't necessarily have to spend the entire year in Latvia. Remember, of course, Latvia is a Schengen country, so with that residency permit, you'd be able to visit other countries in the Schengen area, like Spain, like Portugal, keeping in mind, of course, the 90 to 180 day rule for non-EU citizens. From a tax perspective, Latvia seems a little more friendly than some of the Northern European countries as well, with a top tax rate of 31% on personal income tax, which is applicable on income above 78,000 euros. So anything you earn above that would be taxed at a higher rate. But something interesting that Latvia offers when it comes to dividend tax, and this may be interesting for digital nomads, is that they've implemented a taxation scheme which is very similar, if not identical, to Estonia's model, which is if, for example, you have an entity in Latvia or in the EU and you distribute dividends out of that entity to yourself, if corporate tax, which is 20% in Latvia, has already been paid on those profits that are being distributed out, then there is effectively no dividend tax levied on that. So perhaps something to keep in mind if you're a digital nomad, remote worker, this could be interesting to you. All right, now let's head south, and yes, now we get into some of the warmer, sunnier countries in Europe. With the first one that we're going to look at is Greece. Under Greece's golden visa program via the property route, property purchases of 250,000 euros are eligible. However, there are certain areas in the country where that minimum increases to 500,000 euros. And those areas are the north, south, and central districts of Athens, Thessaloniki, Vari, Vouliameni, Mykonos, and Santorini. So if any of these areas are where you're looking at for a property purchase, keep in mind that the minimum investment goes up from 250,000 to 500,000 euros. Following changes to the legislation earlier this year, however, the more expensive regions have had the threshold increased from 500,000 euros to 800,000 euros, with some additional islands being added as well, with the remaining regions having the threshold increased from 250,000 euros up to 400,000 euros minimum investment. Something interesting with the Greek scheme as well is that it doesn't just allow for property purchases, it also allows for long-term leases, 10 years typically, for homes, apartments, hotel rooms, tourist properties or timeshares. Important things to note here, the legislation says that the owner must have the full ownership, possession and peaceful enjoyment of that property, either as an individual or via a legal entity, whether it's in Greece or in another EU state, where the beneficiary of the property is the full shareholder of that legal entity. So full ownership, again, you can essentially interpret that as no mortgage. You're not allowed to buy a property with a mortgage in Greece. Important as well is when the payment for the acquisition of that property is made, it has to be done through a crossed bank check to a bank, credit institution, financial institution based in Greece, essentially proving that money outside of the country has come and arrived in Greece. And before you apply as well, you'll also need to provide proof of purchase through the land registry department. I'm going to put a map on the screen of typical prices per meter squared across different regions of Greece. So as you can expect, the Athens municipality is pretty much the most expensive one, with an average price per meter squared of around 3,000 euros per meter squared in the north and south districts. Outside of Athens, in the rest of the Attica region, you can find properties for around 2,000 euros per meter squared. Other areas of interest, so Thessaloniki, the average price per meter squared is 2,200 to 2,400 euros. And then on the islands, the likes of Heraklion, again, you'll find properties with a price per meter squared of approximately 2,000 euros. Now, from a tax perspective, generally speaking, Greece is not necessarily the most tax friendly. Greece has a top rate of 44%, and that is on anything above 40,000 euros. So anything above 40,000 euros would be taxed at 44% in Greece. That said, of course, the cost of living in Greece is quite affordable. I did a comparison between Thessaloniki and Athens compared to Madrid, and they are about 19 and 21% lower respectively. So this is compared to Spain. So imagine if you're coming from the US or from the UK or from the rest of Northern Europe, where purchasing power is significantly higher, then you'll certainly be able to get by on less money in Greece. Greece also has a number of beneficial tax regimes for new foreigners arriving in the country, such as a 7% flat tax for retirees, provided they have not been Greek tax residents in 5 of the last 6 years. They also have an option for high net worth individuals to pay a flat 100,000 euro tax bill per year. So someone with a really high income or a lot of assets, that might be beneficial for them because it might lower their effective tax rate rather than paying, the top rate in the standard tax regime. And new residents can opt to benefit from these schemes for up to 15 years. Now let's move on to number 3 on the list, a very small island in the south of Europe, that is Malta. So Malta has a number of different programs to try and attract foreigners to come to the country. They've even got a citizenship by investment program as well, which is for very high net worth individuals that can cost up to €1 million. So what I'm specifically going to focus on here is the acquisition of residence via property investment. So for property purchases in Malta, the minimum investment is 300,000 euros in the south of Malta or 350,000 in the rest of the island. And that can actually work out to be very affordable because the minimum rent required is 10,000 euros per year in the south of Malta or 12,000 euros per year in the rest of the island. However, in Malta, it's not as straightforward as just buying or renting a property and then applying. There are other costs involved as well. There is a non-refundable administrative fee of 40,000 euros that needs to be paid. And then there's a government contribution of 28,000 euros for people purchasing a property or 58,000 euros for people renting a property. And so for people going down the renting option, that would bring the total cost up to about 150,000 euros. Still not bad considered the price of some of the other programs, but of course the difference here being you don't own any of the property. And for the people going down the ownership route, then it would bring your cost up to about 400, maybe a little bit above 400,000 euros. And then additionally, a 2,000 euro donation is required to an NGO or charity. And so not only are there a lot of costs involved in Malta's program, but also the requirements of who can apply are very, very high as well. Now, if you want to bring additional beneficiaries on top of the main applicant, then it would cost 7,500 euros extra per person for each of these. So again, increasing the costs. You need to be in receipt of stable financial income. There's no minimum income defined, but it has to be stable. But then, and this is where it will catch a lot of people out, the applicant needs to have capital assets of at least 500,000 euros with at least 150,000 euros being in financial assets. So whether it's in a bank account, investments, whatever. So unless you've got a significant pot of retirement built up, or you're perhaps not planning on selling a home that you have back in your home country, then it can make things a little bit complicated when it comes to meeting the requirements. On the flip side, however, you can acquire a property via a mortgage in Malta's program at the discretion of the bank. In addition, if you buy a property below the minimum value, but you then invest money, so you have a cost to renovate the property, and that then brings you up to the 300 or 350,000 euro threshold, then that also would make you eligible for the residency permit. So interesting and good to know. Now, Malta from a tax perspective has a top rate of 35%, and that comes into effect on any income and above 60,000 euros. There's a tax-free allowance of well up to about 12,000 euros as well. So depending on your personal income, that can be quite a beneficial system as well. Malta as well, though, has some beneficial tax programs. It has a non-dom regime, which will lower the percentage you pay on your worldwide income, essentially. It also has a global residence tax program, which is a flat rate of 15% with a minimum tax of 15,000 euros. And it has the same flat 15% rate with a minimum tax of 7,500 euros on a different program called the Malta Retirement Program. So for retirees, this can be beneficial if you're moving to Malta as well. Malta, a very beautiful island, very sunny, warm weather, very historic as well, but it is quite a small island. I'll put some data on the screen showing average property prices in Malta, but as you'll see, the average property price is typically round about the minimum investment required for the Residency by Investment program. You see that the average asking price for a studio is around 280,000 euros, with the average for a 2-bedroom apartment being at about 340,000 euros, and the average for a 3-bedroom apartment being at about 455,000 euros. Now let's talk about the last country on the list, and we're going to the very limit of Europe here, almost in the Middle East at this point, and that is Cyprus. Now, important to note, at one point, Cyprus had a program called the Cyprus Investment Program, which allowed people to purchase property and acquire Cypriot citizenship through that program. That program was scrapped in 2020. However, the Residency via Property Investment Program remains open today, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So the minimum for the Residency via Property Investment in Cyprus is 300,000 euros plus VAT of 10%, and it doesn't have to be a single property. It can be 2 properties, providing that the total comes up to that 300,000 euro threshold. And to prove the purchase, you'll need either the contract of sale or the title deed. Given the situation in Cyprus and the fact that many people were displaced in 1974 from their homes, my understanding is that the title deed for the property is very, very important to have. So regardless of whether you use that or contract of sale for your application, I would say definitely get a copy of the title deed of the property. Now, Cyprus as well has some other requirements for applicants as well, and that's a minimum income of 50,000 euro income for the main applicant, which is increased by 15,000 euros for a spouse if they're going on the application as well, and then for children an additional 10,000 euros. It's important that unless you're investing as a director of a Cypriot company, which if you're going down the property investment route, you're probably not, then this permit doesn't allow you to work in Cyprus. It does not allow for you to seek employment. Like in Greece, you can acquire the property through a legal entity that's based either in Cyprus or the EU, provided that you and your spouse are the sole beneficiaries of it and that you are the shareholders of the legal entity that is purchasing the property. Now, regarding whether a mortgage is allowed, it says that all funds must be sourced from outside of Cyprus. So if you want the residency permit, you could not acquire the property with a mortgage in Cyprus. That's not to say that you couldn't necessarily contact a bank in another country and try and get a mortgage through that way. But before doing that, I'd definitely consult with a professional to understand what exactly are the implications of doing so. Once your application is approved, you'll need to require residency in Cyprus within a year of that approval. And if whilst you have that residency permit, you're absent from Cyprus for 2 years, then you will essentially lose your residency rights. Now, in terms of property prices in Cyprus, there is an index called the RICS Cyprus Property Index, which shows the evolution of the property market over time. And the long-term trend is that prices in Cyprus are on the increase. If you remember when I went there in 2022, I showed that there were a lot of properties under construction, a lot of new properties being built. And the same trend can be found in a PwC report that's looking at the property market in Cyprus as well. The common finding in both reports is that Limassol is the most expensive area to acquire property in Cyprus, and it's also where the majority of foreign purchases happen when it comes to purchasing property in Cyprus as well. To give you an idea, according to the PwC report, the average price of an apartment in Limassol is around 390,000 euros and a house around 423,000 euros. Other areas of interest perhaps for foreign investors might be the city of Larnaca, where you can find an apartment for about 156,000 euros and a house for 257,000 euros, and Paphos, where the average apartment price is 179,000 euros and the average house 360,000 euros. Now, whether you're a retiree or a business person, I think Cyprus is a great option. Think of all the EU countries, Cyprus is up there with Portugal in terms of which countries in the EU get the most days of sun per year. So you can definitely enjoy the sunny beaches and the lifestyle there. And if you're a digital nomad or business owner, then of course you've got schemes like Cyprus's non-dom tax regime that you can benefit from as well, where you can set up a tax efficient business structure. Cyprus has one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the EU at 12.5%. Under the non-dom as well, you get an exemption on the defense tax, which would essentially mean tax-free capital gains and dividends that you can pay out in Cyprus as well. So Cyprus, a great option for a range of people. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, found it helpful and useful. Leave a comment and let me know where you're thinking of going after watching this video. And if you enjoyed this one, then be sure to check out my video on European property for beginners, as well as the video where I talk about why Spain decided to scrap its golden visa via property investment option as well. Till next time, I'll see you on the next one. and let's get this money.